Good morning and welcome back to the Catholic Morning Show. Deacon Mark Campbell here. Happy to have with me Deacon Mike Manno, Gina Knoll. Of course, you know them as the hosts of Faith on Trial, heard across the Iowa Catholic Radio Network on the weekends on a Saturday afternoon and Sunday evening. Or do I have that reversed, Deacon? I nailed it. I should know our programming by now. But at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, a replay at 6 p.m. on Sunday evenings. But this is a show that has a long history and has been a part of Iowa Catholic Radio programming for a long time. Deacon Mike, real quick, if you can, how long has the show been on the air? And then we'll kind of get into maybe how it started.
Yeah, it's been on since 2013, something like that, 14, somewhere around there. We've been on a long time. And we've been moved around on the schedule a lot of times too. So,
well, that's a great sign of perseverance, right? That there's always been a demand for it.
They tried to get us off the air, and we survived.
You threatened with litigation,
that's
didn't
right,
you? You said
right.
we are.
Gina and I will sue. Yeah.
What was it? One of the first original Iowa Catholic Radio programs that became a staple
what we did originally is I would do the interviews from home or Skype, and they were about 8 minutes long, and I would send them down to the studio, and they would put them together as a package, a half-hour package, and I'd give some commentary between the segments, and that's how it started, and that's exactly how it started.
Now, was that in 2013? Is that
something like that?
Okay,
yeah, something like.
And then when did it graduate into becoming a half hour and then an hour long show?
Mike Peters, who is the director of the studio, or the program director, the whole.
He was running the ship.
The
decision stopped with him.
The chief chef and bottle washer.
Yeah.
And he came to me and he said to me one day, he said, I've got two bits of news for you. He said, we're taking you off this Saturday run, because that's when we would usually run. Then they'd put it on Saturday. And we're going to put you on whatever day of the week you want. And you can pick the day and you're going to go live. Well, we'd never been live before. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I picked Tuesday. And I said, one condition. And he said, what's that? I said, I want to have a co-host. I want to have somebody with me so that if I lose my train of thought or something, which I do all the time, and Gina picks up on it, I'll have somebody there to talk to. And then he said, okay, if that's what you want, you can have a co-host.
And so, your original co-host, who did you invite in to be with you? It's always been Gina Knoll.
I was, I had other people in mind because I had been on doing guest things before with other people, but I couldn't quite think of somebody just right. And so I asked my wife. I said, "Who would you recommend to me?" And she said, "Gina Knoll." She had just finished, I think, a chirp group with. She said, Gina would be perfect for you. So I called Gina. I'd never met her before. Called Gina, and I explained to her what the show was and that I needed a co-host. And I remember what she said to me. She said, "You're not selling this very well." And she said, "Let me think about it." So the first show that we had, live show, I did myself. It was half hour. And then she called me after. She said, "I've been thinking about it." She said, "I'll try it one time." And so the next time we had a program, the following Tuesday, she came in. And this is when we're down at the Chancery Building, the old studios. She came in, she sat down, she said, "I'm just going to do this one time." See how that's fine. So we sat her down and we did the show, and I could see halfway through, I could see in her eyes that she was a yes.
All right. Well, look, now that's why we have Gina here. Now we're going to get her version of events and see how well it matches up with your perceptions. What did you think of that first phone call?
I feel like I'm in marriage counseling. Jeez. Anyway, I used to listen to Iowa Catholic Radio, and I really enjoyed Mike's programming on Saturday mornings when I'm running my errands. I listened to it, and it really drew me in. The show in particular was, Mike has such a great knowledge of history and theology, and to bring those two things together in our State of the Union in the United States is amazing. So I listened to a program once that really drew me into his program about the history of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
He really went into detail and explained, so many of us don't understand how we got there and why it was ruled incorrectly and why it continued to be challenged. I loved it. And so I mentioned it to him one morning at Coffee and Donuts after church. And so I was intrigued, I guess, when he invited me to do the show with him. I don't have that kind of knowledge or training or history, and especially I don't have the legal background. So, but he seemed to be okay with my bringing the man on the street version to our programming.
And so the relationship has endured. You guys have
Yeah,
been,
and
been
I've
at it
always
for a
said
while.
she asks the best questions when we have guests
Yeah.
on, because I get in the weeds with the legal stuff and the history stuff, and she'll ask something like, "How are your clients feeling?" And that's the human part of the program. Yeah,
Well, and that I think that's one of the beautiful things about your program, right? Is that you guys are you're looking at the black and white, the what is true, what is not true, what is good, what is bad. So there's clear lines of distinction that sometimes can get. It's where the human element sometimes can be overlooked. And talking when we're looking at these types of things, there is definitely an aspect of there's a person behind whatever's being analyzed or discussed.
in law we have a saying, "Hard cases make bad law,"
Mm.
and you just hit the reason why.
Yeah.
Because there are people behind these things, and sometimes the law bends one way or another because of emotion, and that's not the way it should be. It should be straight up and down.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well, it kind of even goes back to the argument between faith and reason, right? That some people want to say there's a distinction between the two, right? You can't they don't go together. Faith and law sometimes there's
that's
you
right.
can't blend the two, but you guys have proven that to be a false accusation. You guys are going to be wrapping up your show, which is why we're kind of having this conversation this morning. Let listeners know that the time has come. The curtain is about to close on this era of programming. What ultimately led to the decision?
To the decision to quit the show,
Yeah,
uh, me,
yeah.
I did. Since my stroke, I've had problems seeing. I can't read very well. Everything I do Luann has to. Luann's my wife, for those who don't know. Luann has to walk me through it a lot, and it got a little cumbersome for me. And there's something else that I want to do right now for at least a while. I've got marked out the first part of the year to get it done, and I have a book, another book I want to write. Only this one is not a murder mystery like my old ones. My first book I wrote, I killed a nun, so I have to confess to that.
Now listeners are intrigued. What's the title of that book?
Yeah.
I want to read where Deacon Mike incriminates
Yeah,
himself
that's right. That's right.
or implicates himself in a
In a murder,
yeah. Gina, when Deacon Mike shared the news with you, what were some of your thoughts?
Well, my first thought was I'm really excited not to have to fly down the interstate after recording the show to get to work on Thursday morning. So that part's nice. um, I, my first thought was that there are so many of these stories that we cover that are so important, and it just I feel like they increase every year rather than decrease, and which is an attack on people of faith, and it's sad that we won't continue to highlight those, but I'll be thankful not to have to read about them every single week of the year. So
Well, you actually touch on it. I think again a segment that many of our listeners maybe take for granted, right? And that is, as you guys prepare for these episodes of Faith on Trial, that you're reading some difficult circumstances that people are encountering.
Yeah.
You're really looking evil straight in the eye, right? And then trying to look at how, from a Catholic and a faith perspective, how do we defend it? How do we make sure we're coming out on the right side of the law? So I just want to say that from my perspective, and I'm sure there's a number of listeners who are just very grateful that you guys have been able to provide this type of content, but also do it with the courage and faithfulness that you have. As we kind of wrap up the conversation here, is there a moment that has stood out, a particular story that you guys felt really signified the accomplishments of Faith on Trial in the programming that you provided?
I don't know if they signify the accomplishments, but they signified some of the scariness of it. And I think you mentioned as we were coming in, Kyle Seraphin. I think having the FBI whistleblower on telling our listeners how they were targeting the church was something that was really scary, because what we saw before, most of these attacks on churches were attacks on small evangelical churches that really didn't have the means to fight back until groups like the Thomas More Society and the Alliance Defending Freedom came along and started scooping these people up and defending them. But nobody took on the Catholic Church, really. And now they were starting to take on the Catholic Church, and it was the Latin Mass people they were taking on. And that was kind of scary to me. One of the other problems that we had with the program was that every week you look at all these things that come through. And of course, I'm on everybody's email list. You know, I get 40 emails in the morning before I get up and brush my teeth, you know, and picking out which ones I want for the program. And then can I get them? Because sometimes these people were very hard to get on the program because they're in and out of the Supreme Court all the time. So they're going to listen to want to be on a radio station in Iowa, you know, and but we got them, and we got, I think Gina will agree, we've got nice rapport with all of these people out there. Now, when we call, they know who we are, and they're willing to sometimes change their schedule to meet ours.
Awesome. Gina, any last thoughts?
If I can pick out one particular thing that's just been a ray of sunshine for me in these battles, these legal battles that we've highlighted, is the to be able to see Dobbs overturned and to overturn abortion legislation in the state, and watching the individual states incrementally over the last 13 or how many years we've been on the air, watching them make progress in saving innocent lives of unborn children. I think it helps to change hearts and minds, which I think is more important than winning these legal battles. But it gives us an opportunity to continue to educate and to be a part of that has been, and to be able to literally talk to the people that have been in the courtrooms charging these cases and the defendants in the cases, learning about them. That to me is a highlight of this whole progress of the show.
Well, you touched on something there that I think is a great place for us to close this portion of our conversation. We're going to go a little bit deeper. We'll invite our listeners to go to our YouTube channel to visit the rest of our conversation we're going to have here today. But I want to kind of close with the idea that within the legal aspect of it, right, of case law and what have you, this is really a battle for souls, right? It's yes, we want the laws to reflect our Catholic faith and reflect what we believe God has intended for the design for the human existence, for human dignity, but it's about winning over the souls of those who God wants eternally with him in heaven, and he wants all of us to choose him, and you guys have done that. So on behalf of all of Iowa Catholic Radio listeners, Iowa Catholic Radio, our staff, supporters, thank you for what you guys have done. I know there's going to be maybe a continuation of this in some format, but we'll talk about that, and we'll have our listeners go to our YouTube channel now to if you want to hear the rest of our conversation. I'm Deacon Mark. This is the Catholic Morning Show. All right, Deacon Mark Campbell from the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, along with Deacon Mike Manno, Gina Knoll, host of Faith on Trial, a program that's been on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network for about 10 years and started in its infancy as a
closer to 13, probably.
Well, you're right. I'm in denial of my own age, Deacon. So it's
it depends on when you catch the starting date, because it evolved. It was just a little segment, and then it was more, and then it went live, and
it was a half hour, and now it's an hour, and as you mentioned,
one time we're an hour and a half.
Oh wow!
Remember that?
No.
Yeah, we were an hour and a half.
She blacked out during that period. That was
somebody dropped out ahead of us, and we had to go in for 2 weeks or 3 weeks
to cover the programming time. Wow,
it was tough.
Yeah,
it was tough.
Because I mean, as we kind of touched upon, is that these are sometimes hard conversations that you're having. So 90 minutes of hard conversation would exhaust anybody, and you were still trying to have a day job, right? Because Iowa Catholic Radio, let's be honest, doesn't necessarily barely pays the gas bill over here to drive, right?
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, of course, I had law practice at the time, and was doing other things, and
well, let's go right into that then, Deacon Mike, if you don't mind. What drew you to the practice law and get started in that career?
Perry Mason.
Okay.
when I was a
Straight from the
kid.
television
That's
show.
right. Used to watch that. My dad watched it, and I watched it with him, and he would explain things. He wasn't a lawyer,
Okay.
but he would explain things to me. And when I expressed an interest in being a lawyer, going to law school, he kept saying, "Well, there's a good one right up the street," pointing to Drake. And he was very much encouraging that. Yeah.
So
He
you
didn't
grew
live to see me become a lawyer, but yeah, he encouraged it.
So you grew up here in Des Moines,
Grew up
went
here
to
in Windsor Heights,
okay.
went to St. Teresa's School, and graduated from St. Teresa's and the beautiful nuns that were there.
Yeah.
Then went on to Dowling, and then ultimately I went to Creighton for undergraduate in journalism. See if there's a connection here, journalism. Then after a few years, I went back into school and went to law school, picked up my law degree, and I was teaching college at the time. So I thought I better get a master's degree someplace. I got a master's degree at Iowa State in political science. So now look at what I do: journalism, political science, and law.
Almost like God was setting the stage,
That's
right?
right, yeah.
And you even illustrated earlier in our conversation about, and it's one of the, I'm going to just say it's a kind of a mantra here at Iowa Catholic Radio, in that the Lord has provided the people who are needed at the time that they're needed. It's just beautifully orchestrated the way many people have found their way into the Iowa Catholic Radio family. But so as you were going through law school and exploring, education, did you ever wrestle with your Catholic faith at all, or was it always something that was just went hand in hand for you?
It always kind of went hand in hand with me, but I've got to admit that sometimes I was very lax.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but I never strayed too far. And the one thing that always kept me was the Rosary and Mary. That was a big thing for me. Was the Blessed Virgin. I remember my parents saying the Rosary at night together. And I remember my mother years later, every time something came up, she grabbed a rosary. She'd sometimes say 6, 8 rosaries during the day, I think. And every time you went to visit her, there was always a rosary in the table right next to her. Yeah.
And then your call to diaconate. Then what was that like?
It went kind of quick, I think. What happened is Gwen and I were over at St. Francis, and we were getting involved there. She was on the parish council, and I was an usher, usually at the 8 o'clock mass in the morning, and we were involved in Bible studies and things like this. And a lady came up to me one night after one of our Bible study things, and she said, she said, "My husband and I have been talking, and we think you'd make a good deacon." Mm. And that's what it took. My mom had said that to me before, and my mom always told me, your aunt wants you to become a priest, and I never did that. But this final thing, just off the cuff comment that she made, I thought maybe I ought to look into that, because it's about the third time I've heard it.
Well, I don't know I don't know a lot of lawyers, but the ones I do don't have a lot of free time. So I'm trying to figure out.
Well, I wasn't that good a lawyer, so I had a lot of free time. Yeah.
I don't believe that. But at the same point in time, how did you find that balance between work and ministry, and particularly dealing with some of the things that crop up in both places?
Think about it for a minute. How do you deal with your profession and your children? Your family. I mean, you always do it, manage to do it. It just has to be done. So you do it.
Yeah.
You do it. I mean, it's just second nature.
So then the opportunity to start, how did that first invitation, I mean, how did to do those little short segments, whose idea was that? And was there a trial period of give me 5 of these and let's see if this is going to work? Or was it just, hey, show up and do this?
What happened was I was asked, the earlier version of the morning show had asked me to come on a time or two to talk about a couple of little legal things that came up. Mm-hmm. And I did that, and I got to know Mike Peters, who at the time was the station manager, who went on to become worldwide radio management for EWTN.
Yep.
Yeah. And but anyway, we started talking one day about all these little things. And so I'd send in these little vignettes, and they talk about them. And so they started doing something else, and they asked me to we talked about doing the show. And one of the things I remember Mike asked me was, "Do you have enough of this stuff that can keep it going?" do we have enough? Yeah.
Does evil stop?
Yeah.
Does evil go to sleep?
Yeah. And so that's how it all started.
Yeah.
It all started talking with Mike Peters, and we got to talking about how to present this stuff and what to do, and that's where it came from.
Awesome. Gina, what was your sort of, you were recommended as a potential co-host. What background did you bring to the equation that made you an appealing candidate to Deacon Mike?
Well, I think I bring a unique view from the standpoint that for my adult life, I have been intimately involved in political campaigns with candidates across the state of Iowa, some of them national. Some of them very local, and that's what I did for a living for a very long time. So I brought that kind of unique standpoint that I tried to express to our listeners, that elections matter, and being involved, knowing your candidates, knowing their value system is incredibly important. And I think throughout our tenure on the program, we did emphasize elections often, and we talked about how that's important so that a lot of these cases never got to the court systems. So I think that's my unique standpoint in what I bring. Also, I'm a mom of 2 girls, right now, recently out of high school, so we're getting to that empty nest stage. And I had one daughter who went through Catholic school all the way through graduation, and one that switched in middle school to the public school system. So was kind of able to bring a unique perspective about a lot of these issues that affect our children.
Right. And then I heard it mentioned previously that you went through a Christ Renews His Parish experience.
Yes. So,
talk about that.
I helped St. Augustine wanted to bring the chirp retreats to our parish. So I worked with Father Joe and a team from St. Augustine that did their chirps over at St. Pius for a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4. And talk about a time commitment. That was a lot. And it was hard work, but it was really worth it. So then we brought it to St. Augustine, and I think we operated it for 10 years at St. Augustine, and really got to know a lot of wonderful parishioners at our church and our school that I did not know until we did those retreats. I felt so well connected to Christ at that time of conducting those retreats and leading them.
I've been a part of it. They are special experiences to both, right? A connectivity to your fellow parishioners, and then ultimately the relationship with God is enhanced through that. So let's get into the show a little bit. As far as how do you guys go about planning? Who takes the lead? Who does what element of preparing for a weekly show of Faith on Trial?
Well, I go through starting Monday morning.
Those 40 emails.
I go through, there's 40 emails by the time I get up. There's another 100 that come in. I'll sometimes get 100, 150 a day.
You're a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all of those African princes that want to leave you their inheritance are
people that want to take care of my car.
Right.
My insurance runs out. But I would go through those, and I would kind of sort through them a little bit to see what ones sounded promising. And I had to think, one of the things you have to worry about is what sounds good on the radio. You don't
never be boring.
Yeah, that's right. You don't want to be boring, and there are a lot of technical, legal things that come up that would just, yeah, there you go, put everybody to sleep. You have to avoid those, and then I'd have to find a place that these people were coming from, whatever organization they were with, ADF or Thomas More, whatever. Which ones are the easiest ones to work with? And place a call and pick out 2 of them, place a couple of calls and see if I can get some response back. The hardest part was sometimes when I was trying to deal with somebody new, they wouldn't know who we were and they wouldn't respond to me. And so we'd tape on Thursday morning. And so Wednesday morning, when I got back, Wednesday, I would go out and do my communion run to the hospitals. I'd come back and it'd be noon and I still wouldn't have an answer from somebody. So now I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I need another person. And then I would usually look around for somebody that I know is really easy to deal with, so that I could get somebody on for the next morning. But that became a chore. And I know you've done it a couple of times, and you found out what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pause you right there. We'll just take a short break, and then we'll continue our conversation here on in just a few minutes, talking with Gina Knoll and Deacon Mike Manno. They are the hosts of Faith on Trial, a longtime program here on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. It's going to be coming to a conclusion, at least in its weekly format style. We'll have more with them right after this. Welcome back to our conversation here with Deacon Mike Manno, Gina Knoll, the hosts of Faith on Trial. And when we just before we took a break, we were just talking about how a show comes together. And Deacon Mike shared with us how he fields the wave of requests and ideas. And then it sounds like you maybe pick up and fill in some details.
I was just going to point out that we could record like 1,000 of these shows in 1 week, but the problem is so much of what we do is very time worthy. It's something that's happening right now in society this week, last week. And so it's important that we book our guests as close to the time that these court cases pop up.
Yeah, and that's why we tape on Thursday mornings. I wanted a taping time that was close to our weekend time so that something wouldn't slide by us easily. But no, we'd get all these things in, and occasionally Gina would have a good idea. Not that she only had good ideas occasionally, but she'd read something that I hadn't seen, and we'd get a guess that way. But anyway, once we had the two guests, then we just I put together a sheet saying who the guests were and what they were going to talk about, and the story information that goes along with it, whether it was a press release or a news story or whatever. And I'd share that with Gina, and I'd send the contact information down to the studio so that they could make phone calls in the morning, and we could put the show on the air. And
it's so much easier now that we record. Before we used to do a live, and the technical glitches were always stressful.
And we've had people down. I had one guy that was on one time, and I had talked to him the day before. Oh, he was just excited about coming on, and he talked for half an hour with me on the phone. And I said, fine, I got the phone number. We're going to call him and whatever. And we're on live now. So we go the next day and we go to call him. There's no answer. There is we're live on the air. And ultimately we found out he was in a meeting and he had his cell phone in his pocket and never bothered to tell anybody that something was going. We finally got a hold of somebody there. I think it was Tony Valdez, who was helping us work the board then. Found out that he was in a meeting and he couldn't be interrupted. And that was it.
Missed that guest. Yeah, we had to.
And we've never had those people back on. They've tried. They have a PR guy that...
No 3 strikes and you're out with Deacon Mike.
That's where Deacon Mike's legal, historical knowledge comes in handy, because we could improvise that show.
We did.
Well, it's one thing to improvise a 10-minute radio segment on the morning show, right? It's another thing for a half an hour show or an hour show to try to figure out how you're going to expand on a particular topic, without it turning into a...
that's something I think we were kind of unique, at least unique in starting. If you listen to a lot of these type programs on radio or on television, what's the guest segment?
Right.
About 5 minutes.
Yep, they're really short.
Like that. And I remember Gina telling the story one time when she was booking a guest and they asked her,
how long? Yeah. And I said, well, it's 20 minutes. And he was thrilled. He's like, this is so much easier to explain what we're doing here in 20 minutes than these little 3-minute segments on the television.
So we tried to give our guests long enough to, I suppose, hang themselves if they were talking in the wrong direction. But no, they could tell the story in 20 minutes. And there were very few stories that couldn't be told in 20 minutes. And occasionally we had people on the program that were handling other cases as well. And so if they came up a little bit short, they always had something else to talk about. So we gave our guests long enough to speak. And it was about 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like storage. You'll fill the space you have, right? And that's always I think the neat part about what a show like yours provides for us, again, is that latitude to allow to go in depth. And like you say, if there's extra things to kind of bring into the conversation, that allows for that time. Well, part of the reason, our motivation for this conversation today is that, as we've mentioned, that the show is going to be wrapping up its present format of a weekly format on Iowa Catholic Radio. There's some possibilities that it extends on our on-demand page on a more limited basis. But the show almost met an end before that. Let's go back to a few years ago. How long has it been since you mentioned it earlier, since you had your stroke, Deacon?
Yeah, it was 23, October of 23 is when I had the stroke. I was just sitting at home. Everything was going fine. I was watching TV. And I just said to my wife, I really got a bad headache. And she kind of pressed me a little bit and finally said, let me take you to the clinic or the emergency room or what. I said, no. Had I done that, they say I might not have been here. Had I gone to sleep with that. But finally, it got so bad, she just insisted that I go to the hospital. She took me up to Mercy West, and we went in, and they diagnosed it right away. You've had a stroke, and put me in an ambulance and sent me downtown. And I was there for 6 days. It wasn't apparently a major stroke, but I'll tell you, I could not talk. I remember I was recovering, and the bishop came to see me, and he asked me a question, and I could hear myself trying to talk, but it was just gobbledygook coming out. I thought, geez, I'm a deacon, and he's probably, he was fairly new here. I mean, this guy's a deacon, I'm going to let him go out. But I got over it, and I still have a little bit of difficulty with recognizing certain things. But my eyes have been the biggest problem. That I can't see very well, and I can't read. I can't read a book, and I loved reading, but I can't read a book anymore. I can go maybe a sentence or two, but it's so hard trying to make things out, and so that's what ultimately terminated it, because it's starting to get a little worse.
Well, so you obviously the show was suspended for a little while.
Not that long.
I said little while.
Yeah, because she took
it over. Made me do them, a couple on my own.
Yeah, she took them over and did a good job. Yeah.
And what were some of the ways you had to improvise to restart the show, and in light of the challenges that you've had because of the stroke?
Yeah, I just had to get back up on my feet and be able to talk.
And Luann had to step in. She's been carried a lot of the weight.
She has earned her halo. That is really for sure.
That's she has to do a lot of the reading and proofing your typing and that kind of thing.
And driving. Because a lot of times I have problems with mirages or whatever because of the stroke, and I can't see very clearly, and I can't see numbers on street signs and things like that. Now I can see you perfectly. I can see Gina perfectly. I can sit and watch a football game and see what's going on, but you get stuff up close, and it's more difficult. So when I do my community run and all that, she takes me. She drove me here this morning. She'll drive me here tomorrow morning when we do our final show.
So let's. So the show's going to be wrapping up. Final taping tomorrow. I know that as you guys, sort of close this chapter and we look towards the next chapter. What are some things that just really stand out? This was not clearly not something that either one of you grew up thinking about, planned on. It happened, which is, I think, just when you say yes to God, that's just how life unfolds. He provides opportunities that we never even possibly imagined. As you guys take a moment to look back over the last 13 years.
Provide a nice salary to go with it.
Yeah, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too, Deacon. I mean, it's again, time off purgatory is what we're going for here, right? Yeah. But as you look back, what are some things that just stand out that you're especially thankful or blessed to have experienced? Gina, you want to go first?
Well, honestly, I'll tell you, every Thursday morning when I drive to the studio, my prayer is always to the Holy Spirit. Make me your vessel, whatever comes out of this mouth, make sure it's what you want our listeners to hear. So to me, I'm simply the vessel. That's how I view myself with this particular show, because I don't bring a lot of experience or knowledge to the material, for sure. To me, some of the things that really stand out, I love when I meet a listener. That is an inspiration, because you're just talking to a microphone. Is there really anybody listening to any of this? And they do.
Oh, trust me, they are.
They do, and they or they'll say, "You're Gina Knoll. You work with Deacon Mike on Faith on Trial. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I love your show. I try not to miss it." So those are some of the highlights, I think, for me in doing this, because Yeah, I'm not a performer, definitely not a journalist, and this is all very new to me.
Oh, you've made you fooled me. I'll just say that. I think you come at it very naturally and very comfortably, and have contributed tremendously to the show. Deacon, what thoughts do
That
you
was
have?
a nice counterbalance for her with me, is that she took that attitude with
Yeah.
the show and did very well with it. And it was, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted a co-host, so that we could
Oh, yeah.
develop something like that. For me, what's biggest takeaway for me, um, the biggest thing for me is I got to meet, talk to, and get to know rather intimately some of the greatest lawyers in the United States today, who've been in front of the Supreme Court many times with many victories, the courts of appeals many times with many victories, and state Supreme Courts. And as a lawyer, you couldn't ask for anything more than to talk law with these people. And of course, we had a lot of great conversations off the air. As we're getting ready to go on, we're talking to them before we flip the switch on the tape machine and start taping. Yeah.
I have to also add that Mike brings up these lawyers that when these organizations that we have had on the program, uh, they have all, unfortunately, they've all grown in the number of lawyers that they employ or engage. What they do for people of faith that costs people of faith no money is heartwarming to me every time we bring them on, because if these are martyrs. A lot of the defendants are martyrs. What they do in the name of Christ is amazing. Mark Hoke comes to mind just because he's real relevant right now. But we've had him for. There's been a number of these heroes throughout the
Sweet Cakes by Melissa.
Right.
Yeah.
The young family persecuted in the state of Washington. And these lawyers that do what they do pro bono for our fellow travelers is amazing.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why when we thank them every time we had them on, we get them to give their website, and I'd always mention they take donations there.
Yeah,
they do everything pro bono. These people that could not afford a lawyer to defend them are getting good defense, and because of the generosity of the people who are listening and will contribute.
Well, I know we're going to give you a chance to fulfill your obligation to our Blessed Mother and get that book written that you mentioned earlier. We're also we're in maybe some conversation around maybe the show continuing on and maybe a less frequent format, but still tackling maybe as society sort of dictates some shows that again address these difficult topics. But maybe there's somebody out there that wants to step into your shoes, Deacon Mike and Gina. Is there anything, if somebody said, you know what, this is such a great content that it should continue on for on a weekly basis, what advice would you give to maybe somebody who wants to maybe take the torch and keep it going?
Well, I would advise somebody who wanted to do that to be very aware of what is going on legally and in the political sphere. Now, one of the problems that we have is we touch on politics, but we really can't become too partisan.
Right.
All right. So we have to walk really a fine line, kind of a tightrope as we're walking through all of these things. But as Gina says, elections do matter. And you can see the difference between what we have now and what we're looking for in another month when Mr. Trump becomes president again. And that's going to solve a number of the problems that we've been having. Not all of them, but a number of them.
Well, it eliminates some of the legal battles.
Some of them,
right.
Not in the states, though, because we'll still see that in a lot of the blue states. We sit here kind of immune from that because we've got a pretty red state. But a lot of stuff is going to be going on in the blue states.
It harkens back to John Wynn, who just I was at a presentation he was at recently, and he talked about how our faith is personal, but it's not private. I mean, we have to remain engaged in the civic and public square, and living out our life of faith publicly in that way, and not be afraid.
John was on one of our great programs that we had when the Bishop Johnson issued his regulations for parochial schools, Catholic schools in the diocese, how to deal with people who wanted to change their identity, their sexual identity. and we had on one of the leading ethicists in the United States with John, and we discussed that for an hour. That was a good program.
A good program, yeah.
Do you have either one of you have a best of episode? If you had to put one show at the top of the list of like, I want to do that show again.
One that I think of, and I don't know if it's the best we've ever done, but we had a pilgrimage here where they brought the statue of Our Lady of Fatima or whatever it was, and they had somebody who was talking about giving the presentation. We had that person on for an hour.
Wow.
And we talked about Fatima. We talked about the secrets of Fatima. We talked about what happened to the children, the 3 children that were the seers there. And that was very, very interesting. And I'd replicate that anytime I could if I get expert like that on.
Awesome.
And Fatima is important to people of faith when you talk about governments and politics, right? She predicted, a lot of the harm that would come to countries that addressed communism. So invoked.
Do you remember when that episode was? What year?
It was last year, wasn't it? Sometime. I can give you the date because I've got them all.
Yeah.
All these things I send out down to the studio and to Gina every Wednesday. I've saved a copy of those. So I've got 3 volumes of these schedules. So I can look up.
Well, what I want our listeners to know is that, or people that are watching us on YouTube here, is that they can go to your show will remain at the on-demand page at iowacatholicradio.com. You can go back and revisit that episode or any episode that of Faith on Trial that is posted there, addressing some of these, again, just very important topics that the cases still aren't resolved in many cases, or in many instances, the arguments are still being heard and put out there. And again, religious freedom is one of those things that I think, unfortunately, regardless of who's president, is one of those things that's always going to be under attack because...
And it shouldn't be.
Right.
And it shouldn't be. Yeah.
Right.
It should be able to live side by side with everything else that's going on. But it's a message from some people that other people can't accept. They don't want other people to accept it either, and so they try and stifle it.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, right? Of being open-minded, yet certain opinions are just not welcomed.
Like being political and not partisan.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again, I want to thank you both very much for this time spent with me and giving some of those who maybe have been longtime listeners of your show, maybe a little behind-the-scenes look, a little more personal look at each of you.
And they get to see us.
And they get to see you.
They know what we look like.
Yeah,
we
right.
have faces, yeah. And now you see why mine was a face for radio,
Well, it's been a real pleasure to spend this time with you both. And again, thank you for what you've contributed through the years for over a decade here on Iowa Catholic Radio. And as I've been saying to a couple other people recently, it's like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can't leave. Yeah. I mean, once you're in the family, you're always in the family here. And we'll look forward to some conversations down the road. And maybe it returns to a morning show segment where we have you jump on once in a while and give some commentary on some things that are going on in the world, but we won't let you get away.
Okay. Well,
all right.
Well, you know where we are.
That's right.
You can find us very easily.
Well, let's close with longtime supporters of your show, Paul Martin, Paul Mitchell, of Imogene Ingredients. Maybe let's just close with talking about how instrumental they have been in supportive of Faith on Trial.
They have been, and the funny thing is, they don't have a product line that we could easily identify with because
it's animal feed ingredients, right?
Yeah.
And I know it prevents scours, and I'm not a farmer, so I have no idea what that does. But apparently, it's a big deal. They distribute it worldwide.
And because I know Paul's been to China several times working on things, and he's been in Europe a lot, traveling in Europe. I know that I read some time ago a piece, a 30-second blurb for their ingredients, and I heard recently that they were thinking about changing some of that. And I thought, I can't read that if they change it because of the stroke. Gina will have to read that. And fortunately, they didn't do that before we got off the air here. But Imogene, Iowa is where Paul is from.
Right.
And that's...
Paul Martin, let's distinguish.
Paul
we got Paul.
Paul Mitchell's the one that talks with the Irish brogue.
Yeah, he's the one who's not from around here. He's from Imogen, Ireland.
And you can tell that as soon as he opens his mouth and talks to you, you can tell he's not from around here. But but they're great parishioners at St. Augustine's, and they contribute an awful lot at St. Augustine's. I think Paul, I think they've both been Grand Knights, and I know Paul Martin is like the head usher over there, and he's always there with donuts on Sunday morning.
You got to watch out for those head ushers, man. Those guys are they're Gestapo-like. But great. They're great men, great leaders in the community, great supporters of Iowa Catholic Radio and Faith on Trial. So we wanted to give them a quick shout out, quick mention. I think they'll be featured on your last show coming up, and that'll be heard this weekend, right?
Weekend, right? We've got Paul coming in. And we've got Jeff Pierrick.
Oh, yeah.
A good layman.
Yep.
He's an attorney.
Yep.
And Lisa Bourne.
He's and another, beautiful witness to the faith as well. A great defender of life, all of them.
What is it? Heartbeat International.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a great journalist.
Very good.
She's the one who has the background in doing this.
Yeah, she's been over.
So she stood in for me a number of times.
Yeah, and when she was with LifeSite News, she covered the Vatican. She would go over there occasionally, and I've got pictures of her in the Vatican press room. So that's
awesome. Well, let's close in a prayer, shall we? Do you mind, Deacon, if I take the lead here?
Take the lead.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you for allowing that, because I want to just take this opportunity to say thank you, God. Thank you for these courageous witnesses to the gospel and to the truth, beauty, and goodness of our Catholic faith. We, as their show comes to a close, we thank you for what it has provided for all of our listeners. It's been a show of inspiration, a show of faith that has, again, made us all better Christians in our walk with Jesus. We ask your blessing upon both Gina and Deacon Mike, his wife Luann, their families, as this next chapter is revealed to them. May you just continue to bless them and give them your grace and your mercy. And may they always know your love. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here. We'll see you again.